Lots of interesting stuff going on with this Pacers team right now. Jalen Smith is going crazy on a new team. TJ Warren's not playing, but it's still probably the Pacers' best wing. Where does he fit into this team? And what is the ceiling of the current Pacers? Lots to talk about on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers, as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we're talking Jalen Smith and his random emergence on the Pacers, kind of a throw-in trade for the Pacers to cut some salary, trading away Torrey Craig. He's looked awesome in the rotation. Pacers have no wings, too. I want to talk about where TJ Warren could fit in on this team. Lots of former Suns talk today. And then we're going to pivot and talk about what this Pacers team ceiling is. They've looked very solid since the trade deadline, everything except for defense. Where can they go? Where are they headed? And joining me to do that, if you like Indy sports, you've probably heard his voice over at Locked On Colts, writes for Basketball News. It has written for, I think, every basketball website that has ever existed. Mr. Evan Sidery himself. Evan, what's up, man? How you doing?
Tony, how you doing today? I'm glad to be on. I've been watching from afar out here. I know I covered the whole NBA, but being from Indiana, I watch a lot of the Pacers, and I'm just excited for the team's vision. I'm glad we're going to be able to talk more about that today.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch them do a rebuild like this. As you know, being from Indiana, they never do this. This is not something the Pacers do. So, I know it's the All-Star break and everybody's kind of heard these conversations before, but to see them do this, to tear it all down and say, this year does not matter to us, was just such a jarring change from the Pacers. I mean, you knew that growing up too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was all about running it back. And I wrote about this when the trade happened over at BasketballNews.com that this was 2 or 3 years in the making. I mean, this should have happened a couple years ago. And now that they finally got to this point, they're fifth in the reverse standings. Hopefully it breaks right for Indiana, because if they can get lottery luck this year, I mean, they're set up very well. We'll talk about it throughout the show. But Jalen Smith, Halliburton, Duarte, I really love their core.
Yeah, they did a great job getting young talent at the deadline to do either a soft or hard rebuild. And we're going to start with the guy that at the deadline nobody kind of thought about as being a key return piece in trades, and that's Jalen Smith. You used to cover the Suns, still do a lot, just not specifically the Suns. And Jalen Smith, top 10 pick there. The idea was this is our backup for Ayton. Maybe he can play the 4 a little bit like he did at Maryland. It just didn't kind of work is part of it, but correct me if I'm wrong here. The other part of it is, it's not often that a team that has the 10th pick also is then immediately the best team in the NBA. So it's very hard to give your young guys minutes when that's the case, when you're awesome. So in Phoenix, obviously he didn't pop on the court. He would have played more, but he did have a really nice stretch at the end of December of 2021. Jalen Smith couldn't get on the floor very much. His stats were unimpressive, and the Suns declined his option, moved on from him. Now in the Pacers, only 4 games. Suddenly can hit every 3 he takes, is a master from the corners, shooting 60%, grabbing rebounds, defending decently. I mean, you saw that stretch he played in late December when Ayton and JaVale and I think Kaminsky too were all out. But have you ever seen him play like this before? Is this just a role thing, a change of scenery? What's kind of ignited Jalen Smith's play to you?
Honestly, this is how Jalen Smith plays, and I think the reason why I say that is because we saw that stretch, like you mentioned, where there was no big guys available at all for the Suns due to health and safety protocols. I believe it was in December or early January. And Jalen Smith, I believe, was averaging around 14 points and 11.5 rebounds per game over that stretch. Was a good shot blocker as well. Like you mentioned, Tony could space the floor as well. He just never had an opportunity here. I believe the Chris Paul trade happened like 10 days after Jalen Smith was drafted. So right when that happened, the Suns hit the accelerator on going all in for a championship. Jalen Smith's development really was never prioritized from the beginning, which is a reason why his third-year option was declined, which is a rarity for especially a top 10 pick. So when you look at that, factor that in, just think it's a better environment overall for Jalen Smith, where he'll be able to get set up by a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, play a lot of minutes, because Jalen Smith just simply never had an opportunity here. He wasn't really that great in summer league this past year, which I think set off some alarm bells for the Suns that maybe he's just not going to develop. But he definitely improved when he got around Chris Paul outside the summer league setting, so to say. And he's doing it again in Indiana. I think Tyrese Halliburton is a great fit for what he wants to do as far as setting him up.
You know what I keep wanting Jalen Smith to do? I want him to give Halliburton crap because he got picked before Tyrese in the draft.
Yeah.
I don't think
Crazy. Yeah.
I don't think he'll ever do it, but I would absolutely love that. Yeah. We've kind of both talked about it now, and the Pacers sort of had this problem in the past, but not to the same extent. Where, the year they almost beat the Cavs in the first round, TJ Leaf barely played, and TJ Leaf did not turn out to be an NBA player, but there was a lot of hoopla early in the season on why is this guy not playing at all. And then the next year, there in Holiday, he got benched for TJ McConnell. It was the same discussion of like, why isn't this guy playing more? And it's because before Vic got hurt, when Aaron Holiday wasn't playing at all in his second year, the answer was just they want to win. They want to be good. And it's not that they don't want to develop these guys. It's a tough balance to find for these contending teams sometimes. And Vic got hurt, and Aaron ended up playing all the time for the next 2 seasons. Now he's in Phoenix, where he ironically could win a championship with Torrey Craig. Well, the ex-Pacer landed down there in Phoenix right now, which is fascinating. But that's just how it goes. It's sometimes rare for a top even 20 pick. In Jalen Smith case, it was top 10 to immediately be thrust into huge minutes. But in his situation in particular, where they made the finals last year, they could very well do it again this year. The Suns are probably a little better than last year, honestly. He's just never going to get minutes. So the opportunity is there for him for sure. Already playing 8 more minutes per game than he did for the Suns. And the other part of it is, like you mentioned all the skills he showed in those games, but if he hits 46% of his threes for the rest of the season, he'll obviously look a lot better. Like, I don't expect that number to hold, even if I do think he can hit corner threes a little bit. Like, he did that a little bit in Phoenix as well. So that has obviously inflated his numbers a little bit. He's been very surprising, and I think on tomorrow's show I'll do a segment about his contract situation, because that's all very confusing. But it's just a fascinating topic of just, how much your situation can really change the way you're able to play, positions you're able to play, and how you're able to impact the game in a young career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, looking at Jalen Smith and his role in Indiana, like you mentioned, you're going to do a show about it tomorrow, but it's more likely not that Indiana's not going to be able to keep Jalen Smith at the rate that he's going, because the Pacers have a limit on what they can pay him. But with Jalen Smith, I think he's a guy, if he does stick in Indiana long term, for those wondering, could probably be like a 12-point per game scorer, give you like 8 or 9 rebounds per night. If he's that kind of guy, he's a great shooter. We saw his form; it looks very good. I don't know about the percentage that you mentioned, Tony, but it's a really good shooting for him. So if Jalen Smith does stick around in Indy, I think it's a really good spot for him. So we'll have to see on that.
Yeah, it's funny that the way the rule works with these deals is like the best chance they have to keep him is to just not play him like at all,
Exactly.
which is stupid. The rule has to be that way so teams don't just like immediately give raises to their good rookies. But it's like the best chance the Pacers have to keep this guy is like, yeah, you're done. You're not playing the rest of the season, which is super stupid to me. But I get why the rule is what it is. We'll see what comes of him, and I think too a part of his flash that he just had since the deadline is Isaiah Jackson was hurt, Goga Bitadze was hurt, Miles Turner was hurt, right? He had the chance to play, whereas coming out of the break, maybe not all those guys are back, but Isaiah will almost certainly be back, and Goga will almost certainly be back. So they'll have a more refined center rotation. They have Terry Taylor and O'Shea Brissett kind of popping at the 4. They might not play. I just joked about them not playing him, but they actually might not play him out of the break because they'll have a full front court rotation. So we'll see where it shakes out. But certainly, first impressions carry a lot of weight for people, and his first impression was very nice.
You couldn't ask for anything better for Jalen Smith.
Hey guys, let's take one short little break about the good folks over at Built Bar, because Built Bar is making the best tasting protein bars ever. I'm not just saying that. Tons of Locked On Pacers listeners have tried them and said that they absolutely love them, and you got to try them yourself. They're absolutely delicious, 100% covered in chocolate, delicious protein bars that come in a flavor that everybody will love. They have puff flavors that have like marshmallow infusion in them. They've got fruity flavors. They've got sweeter flavors. I love the peanut butter brownie. A lot of people love the cookie dough. You've got to try them yourself. You can get them at Built.com. They all have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. You can see all the macros on their website. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb, absolutely delicious. You got to try them. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. So there's another former Sun that I want to talk about. And it's kind of hard to contextualize TJ Warren right now because he hasn't played since legitimately the end of 2020. But one, he was obviously great when he played. You wrote about his potential contract extension options this offseason. Like he was in line for a lot of money before his injury setback. And then, he was obviously amazing in the bubble, but he hasn't played in a year and a half. And the reason I want to talk about TJ Warren, one, is because him playing basketball would be great for the Pacers at this point just to see what he's like. But two, something about the Pacers trading away Jeremy Lamb and Justin Holiday. They are now very devoid of wings, right? O'Shea Brissett is moving down a position to play the three. They don't have wings right now. So TJ Warren, to me, becomes a little more important to see what his value can be for the Pacers, just to see, one, how he is, and two, how he fits with their new look team. Where do you kind of see him fitting on this team, and how much do you feel like he could help the Tyrese Halliburton era Indiana Pacers?
Yeah, honestly, when looking at that trade a little bit, I think it really makes a lot of sense for TJ Warren to play with a guy like Tyrese Halliburton. He fits a lot in what they want to do as far as he could be a stretch four in that system. Indiana's obviously been playing a lot more small ball recently, so that definitely could be another check in the box for why TJ Warren makes sense in this Rick Carlisle system. You have him kind of being your engine as far as scoring goes. We saw in the bubble, Tony, just how good he is when he gets going and in a rhythm. And it would be awesome to see TJ Warren come back, but honestly, I'm just kind of confused at this point how it's taken this long. Like you mentioned, in a year and a half, he's played 4 games in almost 2 full seasons with his foot injury. So I hope it's not something that's going to keep him out forever or long term like this. But he's really hurt himself, like you mentioned, as far as free agency goes. He was going to be one of the top picks or top choices in free agency this year if he actually returned and had a good season for the Pacers. So TJ Warren's a guy to me where if he does come back, he's a great fit in the system. But at this point, maybe the Pacers just move on. He's not a different timeline for that new group, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can see them doing that because of his age, and especially if they get a wing in the draft to open up minutes for him. To me, just focusing on the rest of this season, I talked about this a lot on Friday's podcast, but I like data. Like, I like to see numbers of how stuff works. And Warren is just a name in this case, but seeing Halliburton plus Duarte and a wing, right? Another wing. I know Shea Brissett's kind of a wing, but not really. Just to see how those lineups do, even if Warren doesn't stay, just seeing how they do, I think will be valuable for the Pacers to know how close are they to actually being good enough to be able to go in on their current core. Like, should they go kind of soon? If they get a wing, could they be back in the playoffs next season? Right? Or, and Warren might not be the perfect guy for this because he's been hurt and he might not return and look good. But just to see how those lineups look like, Warren was a good defender at the end of his tenure too, which was not the case early in his career. With a wing defender, how do those two look? Do they have easier defensive assignments? Is their pressure easier? Are they just better players? I think that is a helpful data point for the Pacers in general, just to evaluate the young guys, and also obviously evaluating Warren, seeing how good he is. Because, like you said, his free agency is going to be fascinating. The Pacers, I think, would like to keep him because he's good in a wing, but he's older. How do you even decide how much to pay him or how many years to give him at this stage? His future is very confusing. I have my own kind of ideas on what I would do. Like, maybe you can squeeze a player option to get him for cheap, but why would he want a short deal? Maybe the new CBA could entice him to take a shorter deal. I have no idea what he would be thinking. But when you haven't played for this long and clearly suffered a setback, despite the team not calling it that last August that kept you out for now 14 months, you have to take advantage when you play. And the Pacers would like that to be a data point. So I don't know if he'll play this season or not, but I kind of think this is a win-win opportunity for him to come back. And that's why I'm so curious how he would fit with the new team that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about it from the standpoint of offense, this Pacers team, of watching from afar this year, they just need someone that can bring a jolt consistently. Obviously, Tyrese Halliburton can do that, but he's more of like the guy who sets everything up. The straw that stirs the drink. Malcolm Brogdon would have been a lot of fun to see right now. I know you mentioned just following your tweets that maybe Brogdon comes back soon to play alongside Halliburton. That would be a lot of fun post All-Star break for them. But for TJ Warren especially, I do think he fits Rick Carlisle's system as far as being a small ball four who can stretch the floor. That's one of Rick Carlisle's basic components for his offense, having a floor spacer. So from that standpoint on, I think TJ Warren's an excellent fit. But just funny because throughout TJ Warren's career leading up to his final year in Phoenix, he was never a three-point shooter. Then all of a sudden when he gets to Indiana, he's chucking him at an incredible rate and hitting at a really high rate. He's one of the best mid-range shooters in the league. Gets a little bit further out, and now he's one of the best three-point shooters in the league when he's healthy. So it's fun to see. I think TJ Warren could be a guy to watch out for. If you can get him on the cheap, he's a great fit.
Yeah, the thing too is, the value I always thought, and we literally never got to see them play together, which is such a shame. But him and LeVert, never, both of those guys are like, okay, the shot clock's at 6 and your play didn't work. They're really good in that situation. Like, no matter who their defenders, they're not going to get a great shot necessarily, but they can break down a defense and get a good look in that situation. And now LeVert's in Cleveland and Warren's hurt. They have no one who's really good at that. Like, Brogdon's okay, I guess, and Duarte is fearless at no matter how much time's on the shot clock. But neither of those guys are your perfect bailout options. Even if that's all Warren can do, that adds a lot of value to this team when their plays die. And then if he can also shoot like he did, who knows how much of an outlier that was. That's just added gravy. Any defense is just added gravy. I just want to see it to know what kind of value he can have, because it seems like, as a small ball four, especially now that they don't have the two centers anymore, he could really fit with Duarte and Halliburton and even Brogdon as your three guards next to him. But it also can make sense to go bigger and play him at the three. That's why I'm so curious about his fit on this team, is just because if I think of everything those guys stink at, Halliburton's not the best, like late clock finisher, and Duarte certainly is rickety and not the greatest at creating space, and neither of them can defend 6'8" guys. Warren can do all those things. So if he can do any of those this season, I think that'd be valuable to see the growth of this young team, and of course, like I said earlier, to see how he is as a player right now.
Yeah, I think that's the primary goal for anything for the Pacers right now, is to see who fits around Halliburton and Duarte the best. If TJ Warren comes back and he does play well in that 3-4 role, I definitely think it makes sense to bring him back. And it's all about that at this point. I think just you have Tyrese Halliburton, you have Chris Duarte, whoever you get in the draft this upcoming year. Hopefully it's a top 5 pick for Indiana's sake. I think those are the three pieces you build around. And whoever fits best stays. Whoever doesn't fit, if TJ Warren ends up not fitting, it's an easy decision just to let him walk at free agency.
Exactly. I agree with all that. And I think gathering those points with the vets, with the young guys, will be very key to the rest of this Pacers season. So this is probably a premature topic, but it's All-Star break. It's time for these zany, off-the-wall kind of conversations. And this could totally change depending on if the Pacers get the first pick or the 9th pick, depending how the lottery shakes or how their free agency period goes, what direction they're really heading. But let's do this now, because it's fun to talk about these kind of topics. What is the new Pacers ceiling? I kind of thought the ceiling of their last team was higher than it ended up being. Like, they were the bubble season. If they had played 82 games instead of 73, they were on 50 win pace that year. Like, that core was good. And then Vic got traded and Domas got hurt in the bubble, and they never even got close to actualizing that ceiling, right? I thought that ceiling of that team could have been at least a conference semifinalist. They were the 4 seed. Like, they were a top 4 team at parts of that season. But it never happened, right? So you never really know what these conversations where you're headed. So with the new Pacers, obviously Halliburton looks awesome, and Duarte is the best rookie they've had in 7 years, probably, since Miles Turner, basically. Maybe even better than Turner's rookie season. You could go even farther back. It's certainly worth noting that they could have a higher ceiling than that team did. I don't know quite where I'm at yet there. If I could put them as quite a conference finalist, it might depend how the draft goes. It might depend what they fetch for their vets. It might just depend how Duarte and Halliburton gel. They've only played 33 minutes together so far. But where do you kind of see, it's, again, 4 or 5 games into a new era, but how do you kind of see this team's ceiling shaking out right now?
Yeah, honestly, with Halliburton and Duarte, if that backcourt does hit its ceiling, Halliburton being a great playmaker, a guy who's shown in Indiana so far, he could be a 20 and 10 guy as far as points and assists goes. Chris Duarte, let's say he slides into like a microwave scorer role of like 17, 18 points per game, maybe 20 plus points could be a ceiling outcome for him. Isaiah Jackson, he becomes like a Miles Turner type of player, athletic rim rolling guy. Hopefully, if you add into the mix there a Jaden Ivy or a Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith, you really take this up a whole nother level with getting a talent like that in Indiana. But maybe you keep one veteran around. Maybe it's a Miles Turner. Maybe it's a Malcolm Brogdon or TJ Warren. I think next year, if they do get lottery luck and they get a top 4 pick, I think this team could be like a mid-40s win team if they actually do hit their ceiling outcomes next year. And beyond that, if they do get lottery luck, again, that's a big caveat here, because if they don't, I could really see it being more of like a tier or 2 below that. But this team could be, I think, a top 4 seed within the next 2 or 3 years if everything goes well for them, because you have the right balance of guys right now. You're building around Chris Duarte, Tyrese Halliburton, and Isaiah Jackson. But also, if you are able to get a generational type talent in this year's draft, it takes you up a whole nother level where you can have your true foundation in place. And I mentioned this before on BasketballNews.com for my story I wrote about the trade from the Pacers side of things. It's a great way to start a rebuild. I mean, you get Halliburton, you get Duarte, you get Jackson. Obviously, they're trying to tank the rest of the season to get a top pick in this year's draft. You have multiple first-round picks this year. So the blueprint is there. I give kudos to Kevin Pritchard because he's kind of is rebuilding on the fly, so to say, or retooling, as I like to say, like a soft rebuild.
Yeah, the draft pick will influence their ceiling a lot. Like, one, how high it is, like we both just said, but 2, if it pans out, because if they haven't, this is every Pacers fan's favorite stat. Like, if they haven't picked in the top 10 since the 1980s. Like, I was not a human yet. the last time they picked in the top 10. That's crazy run of success. But they have, I think it's been very understated, and I should probably be talking about it more myself, how big this draft is for this team. Like, they never get in the situation. It's not like Herb Simon had a change of heart. Like, they're just having a crappy year. I think they would like to be good again next year. And Kevin Pritchard's comments and Tyrese Halliburton's comments have kind of alluded to that already, that they would like to be good again next year. So this draft pick, it might be their only pick in the top 10 for a while again. So nailing it is super important. Getting someone good or awesome even is super important, because in my head, just think about what the Pacers have right now ceiling wise. I think Halliburton could be a more than one-time All-Star. I'm not going to say like a bunch or anything, because he doesn't have quite that ceiling, but he is very good. He could definitely be an All-Star more than once. And Duarte, I think you're right on it. That high level score, maybe not quite All-Star level, but a really good player. That's a good core. That's a good start. That can get you into the postseason and probably through a round. But if they don't have that third piece, like Isaiah Jackson's awesome. We'll see what he develops into. He's still so raw. If they miss the draft pick, then that's probably their ceiling. It's a little lower than the team they just had. But if they nail the draft pick, or they nail the draft pick and Isaiah Jackson's good, all of a sudden you go, wow. Now you got 4 really good young pieces that you're going to have for like 5 years to develop together. Now you're talking about something that actually could go a little farther, and maybe you have 5 or 6 All-Star appearances among that group instead of just 2 or 3. So that I think the draft is going to really dictate how this question gets answered. It's way too early to say anything official on this pairing, but if they nail this pick, I definitely think I'd put their current ceiling above their old core. But it's going to be this is an important lottery. The change lottery odds, the fate of the Pacers are kind of in the hands of the ping pong balls right now. One more break here, guys, to talk to you about the good folks over at BetOnline, because football might be over for this season, but basketball is still in full steam ahead for both the pro and college hoops, especially now that All-Star break is over. And for the latest odds, totals, player performance props, and where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, sports podcasts, and sports news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to your Olympic coverage and information. So head over to their website today at betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts.
All right, so looking at the lottery odds for the Pacers, and you see exactly how it's going to be with that date. I believe it's in the middle of May. It's probably going to be the most watched event from a Pacers fan standpoint we've seen in a very long time, because it changes the hopes of their franchise. If you can get a Jaden Ivy in there, who's going to sell a lot of tickets immediately, being from Purdue, you can go in there, make it is it Gainbridge Fieldhouse now? Baker's Life. It changes so often now. But honestly, if you get a guy like that in the building, it makes so much sense from that standpoint. Even a Jabari Smith or a Paolo Banchero, a Chet Holmgren, this is like a perfect year for the Pacers to be in a top 5 pick of the draft if they can get that ability. But also from the standpoint of, I don't want to compare like cross sports, because it's definitely different from the NFL, but obviously the Colts, when Peyton Manning got hurt, you had the ability to drop that 1 year and go get Andrew Luck, and you only had that 1 year drop off. That's kind of what I'm thinking here for the Pacers. If you can get that Andrew Luck, that generational type of guy atop the draft, you're going to skyrocket straight up the standings. It's not going to be like a top 3 seed next year in a really good Eastern Conference, but it might be a 6 or a 7 seed, or even a playing game. Like even that kind of stuff forward next year with a young core, hopefully for the Pacers, that would be a huge thing, and a lot of things that fans be interested in too.
Yeah, Kevin Pritchard called Tyrese Halliburton Andrew Luck. Like, he made that comparison already, and that we'll maybe that's quite. Andrew Luck was awesome. Like, that would be a very high end outcome for Tyrese Halliburton, which is not crazy. He's been very good so far. But I was like, whoa, KP, that's quite the pressure to put on a guy who has yet to play for your franchise. So yeah, maybe they already have him. Maybe they get him in this draft. We'll see, because I have not done a lot of scouting yet. I will not lie at all. But I think right now I have a clear top 3, and then like a 4 or 5 that I think are pretty good. And then after that, it's like a lot of maybes. And so if you can get top 5 in this draft, I personally think that's a big deal. And if you're 6 through 9, it's like, oh man, it's a little tougher. And that's obviously how the draft goes every year, but it's a big year for it. So the follow-up question to the ceiling question is, and again, maybe too early to say, but I want to have these discussions now. When do you think the Pacers will hit it? And the problem with this is, when I was trying to think about how I wanted to discuss this with you, is I was like, okay, when's Tyrese going to be his best? What about what age, or about with the rest of this team, when would he be maximized? But then there's a point where, you get to Halliburton at his best, but Duarte, because he's 24 already, might be dropping off a little bit at that point. Maybe not, because he doesn't have a ton of basketball mileage on him, but finding that happy medium, I've had trouble figuring out exactly what year I think it's going to be, and I'm curious what you think.
Honestly, if you think about from the standpoint of the Phoenix Suns, I don't want to throw out like a Chris Paul type of guy could be in there, but the Suns went from nothing to something immediately. They went from a legitimate fringe playoff contender, if anything, that year. But when you add Chris Paul to the mix, you go to the NBA Finals. That kind of thing could happen. It's a very small possibility. But honestly, realistically, I'd say 2 or 3 years down the road. Because if you have a young core, if you hit in the lottery, you get a top pick. It'll probably take a year or two for that group to develop together. But once you get to that point where you assess all that young talent and you accumulate all that young talent together, you have a lot of on-court chemistry and I think a really special foundation in place where, let's say 2024, 2025, when the Pacers are hosting the All-Star game, I believe in Indianapolis, that would be 2024. Right. That would be the perfect time for it to happen because it just seems like a perfect scenario to me. But I wanted to ask you something real quick because from the Suns standpoint, when in 2018, I've been covering the Suns out here in Phoenix since 2017. When 2018, when that draft happened, when the Suns got in the lottery, the number 1 overall pick, it was a whole debate between Luka Doncic versus DeAndre Ayton, the local kid DeAndre Ayton against Luka Doncic, who I felt was more personally the obvious choice. And I got a lot of blowback for it. I know a couple other writers out here in Phoenix were in Luka's camp as well, but a lot of people are pulling for DeAndre because of that home poll. I just want to ask you, Tony, that's going to be something at a topic you're probably not going to be looking forward to talk about much in a couple months because it'll get really old really fast. But if the Pacers are in a top 3, top 4 position, it seems like the fan base is going to be Jaden Ivy no matter what, like the draft day movie. I think it's going to be kind of that scenario. So how do you feel like if they do indeed get lottery luck and they stay within that top 4, top 5, how it's going to be amongst the Pacers fan base? Because like we mentioned at the top of the show, this is so different. It's going to be a whole new feeling for Pacers fans if they actually do get a good lottery pick.
Yeah, I have sort of voiced this to a couple other media people at Pacers games now, but never on this show. First and foremost, before I get going, Jaden Ivy is very good. Like he's a very good prospect. He is one of the guys I mentioned in that top 5 tier for me. Like he's really good. So all the fans in my mentions who talk about like the next step for the Pacers, it's always Jaden Ivy, almost always, like 90% of the time. And I get why. Very easy to watch him locally. All the coverage here is about him. That Purdue team is one of the best college basketball teams this state has ever seen. Okay, like yes, I get it. He's going to be very popular. But what I've been saying to the people is like, aim higher if you're a fan of this team. Like Ivy is probably going to be 3 to 5 in this draft. That's great, but like watch Paulo, watch Chet, like look at Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith's my number 1 right now. Watch Jabari Smith. Like that guy is nasty and he could be a 2-way player at a position the Pacers need. Like Paulo's the same way, although he's been hurt a lot. Like there's some stuff at the top of this draft, and Chet is he's gonna have to put on some stuff like muscle, but he can play, man. Like that guy can do a lot right now. So I love the top 3 guys, and Ivy's really good. I'd probably have him 4 right now. So I do not belittle anyone for loving him because he's local and he's awesome, like top 5 level. It's not like OG Anunoby where he was like 15 to 20, although they still should have picked him. But it's a little different than that. But I'm always like, guys, like, yes, you can love Jaden Ivey. That's awesome. But aim higher. There is a higher tier of players. And it's not that crazy that the Pacers could get into that tier given where they are in the standings. So, yeah, Ivey would be great and an awesome fit on this team. But I think there are better guys and better fits.
Yeah, this 2022 draft class compared to other years, though, it kind of reminds me even more of a stronger version of 2018, where that class is legit. But I mean, you see the top 4, top 5 picks in this year's draft, they could all be franchise-changing type of guys. So if the Pacers are lucky enough to get into that, currently I believe they're 5th in the reverse standings with their win against the Wizards the other night, and the Thunder leapfrogged them, or they stayed above them at 4. But at this point, if Indiana can at least get one of these guys we just talked about, Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, Jaden Ivey. There's just some other guys I like in this draft too, who's actually playing right now. Keegan Murray of Iowa. He's another guy I really like as well. So this draft is loaded with guys I love for Indiana, and this could be a situation. I know we mentioned it at the top of the show and throughout, and I know you've covered on the show a lot, but Kevin Pritchard has mentioned sort of a soft rebuild, and I think that could really happen here if they do get some lottery luck and get one of these guys that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially with Jabari Smith, it'd be easy to do a soft rebuild. He's great. And to answer the question I proposed earlier, my exact year of season for when I think, just given what we know right now, the Pacers season would be 2024-25. That is very specific on purpose. You said basically the same years, but that is the year Tyrese Halliburton gets paid. And that matters because, as NBA teams like to do, when you have these guys on cheapo rookie contracts, you keep your cap powder dry, and then right when they get expensive, bam, you sign all your good players while you still have cap space. So that's the year that they'll have all the stuff they signed before he got expensive and him still. So that's probably the best. Duarte will be like 28, 29 then. Assuming there's not a ton, I mean, there will be a lot of change. The NBA is rapid fire changing rosters nowadays. But, assuming that those guys are still around, that seems like to me when they'll be the best version of this team, especially depending on how this draft goes. So, yeah, I think this is the most important draft the franchise has had in my lifetime. And they could have quite the interesting ceiling coming up in not too many seasons from now.
Certainly will be. I mean, as a growing up Pacers fan now, I cover the whole league, so the fandom hat's kind of gone. But seeing the Pacers getting back to that kind of level where it was during the Paul George era before he left with George Hill, David West, those are such fun times growing up against LeBron James. And then before that, I kind of missed the prime Reggie Miller years, but those years, I know Indiana Pacers fans just yearn for that. And I hope for the Pacers fans' sake, for everyone back in Indiana, that they get that, because this is a market that deserves a winner. And I think this has just been a really bad year for Indiana, but it could all end up right in the end with hopefully one of these guys we talked about in the draft. And they have enough assets too. I know you'll cover it all throughout the next couple months in the show, but they could be one of the most flexible teams in the offseason this year. They could have trade Malcolm Brogdon. They could trade Buddy Hield. They could trade Miles Turner. They could stockpile all these future assets or even young guys back and return those trades where you could really reshape this whole team on the fly. So I don't think the Pacers are done yet, but this is going to be one of the more intriguing offseasons I've ever seen as growing up in Indiana being a Pacers fan, because 25 years, I've never seen anything like this in Indiana. It's a really good thing as far as intrigue and being able to do something different now, which is nice.
It was time. It really was. I mean, they had a rare opportunity where they were, 16 and 35 at the trade deadline to do something like this, and it was the right decision. We'll see where they're headed, but I am fascinated by the new era of the Pacers. It's something new for basically everybody in Indianapolis. Evan, thank you a ton for the time, man. I really appreciate it. Where can people follow you and all your many stuffs across many, many sports?
Yeah, I can go through the whole gamut here. Locked On Colts, probably those familiar with my voice. I run the Locked On Colts podcast during the Locked On Podcast Network. So go ahead and subscribe to us and follow on Twitter at Locked On Colts. You can follow my NBA page, I'll say, because I cover the NBA as a whole for BasketballNews.com. You can go read BasketballNews.com and follow me on Twitter at Sidery. So that's where all my work usually is. More often than not, I do the Colts as well for the Locked On Podcast Network. So a lot of fun, Tony. Whenever you need me, I'm more than available. This Pacers team's a lot of fun to talk about now compared to being stale and sort of dull the last couple of years. So it's a nice little change up here. I'm really excited about the Pacers' future.
Yeah, as are most in this market. It's going to be very fun. I highly recommend following Evan for both sports content. Of course, I'm at Twitter at TEastNBA, and the show is at Locked On Pacers. Tomorrow, I'm a day late, but we'll be recapping All-Star Weekend, Tyrese Halliburton in the Rising Stars game to the extent that he played. I'm recording this on Friday, so I have to hedge in case he doesn't play for some reason. To the extent that he played, and talk about a little more Jalen Smith contract stuff, so you don't want to miss that. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you tomorrow.